Welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmanOnline.com. You've joined us for a good one as we get set to talk about lodge leadership and progressive lines. See, leadership in Masonic lodges is unique in that leadership is exercised by one member, the elected brother, Worshipful Master of that lodge, by a system that does offer each member the opportunity to pursue that leadership role if the brother so chooses. We found a great expert on this topic for our podcast as we welcome back Worshipful Brother Luis Gonzalez to add his thoughts on lodge leadership and progressive lines. Welcome back, Brother Gonzalez.
Brother Arce, as always, it is a pleasure and an honor to be here with the Craftsman Online podcast.
Is it because this time you're visiting us as a past master? Is that...
Yeah, it's just, this is the podcast I go to for Masonic Light, and it's just, you keep it real, right? Pertinent topics, we don't hold back, short, sweet, and to the point. So
nice. Appreciate it. Well, he is the past master of Odenton Lodge number 209 in Odenton, Maryland. If you've heard Luis on previous episodes, he shared his experience as a brother and then also as a recipient of the Maryland Lodge of the Year from the Grand Lodge of Maryland. He also has an extensive military and career background as well as a master's degree in leadership. So I couldn't think of anybody better to bring into this episode as we dive into it here. It is called a progressive line, which if there's any Masonic term that kind of for foreigners, or we call them the profane outsiders, to go, what the heck are they talking about? How do you explain a progressive line to either new members or people outside of our fraternity?
It's interesting, right? Because in the sense that traditionally you would work your way up through, you would get appointed by a master, right? Because you've shown interest and say you want to participate and become part of the officers and leadership of the lodge, and they would appoint you as a steward, right? So progressive in that, in theory, you would start off as a junior steward, then as your next year, hopefully the next master would appoint you to the senior steward, and then from there you would go to your very first, like I would say, major role, right, would be your junior deacon, and then from there your senior deacon. And that's the progression part, right? Because this is, and I hold a very different viewpoint, right, in that it's progressive, in that those are the appointed chairs, right? But just because you became a senior deacon doesn't automatically mean that you will become a warden, right? And that's where, because that's why those are elected. If it was meant to be automatic, then it would just be another appointed position and we would follow the thing, right? But 99% of the time, you get elected and the brothers will choose you to become a junior warden. And then in theory, you've shown proficiency there, you've shown leadership traits and qualities. And for those that don't know, the senior warden is the right-hand man of the master, essentially. He has a heavy load to carry, right? From there, he would be elected master. So that's progressive in that sense, right?
I'm with you when it comes to the thought of a progressive line. I like how you structured it, especially the pause for the junior steward, who really is kind of the linchpin in this thing. What typically happens is that after you are raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason, typically in most experiences, the master of the lodge will come to you and say, hey, Brother Gonzalez, welcome to our lodge as a Master Mason. It would be a great honor and privilege if you would consider joining my line. Now, this is the elegant way of doing it. Most lodges just say,
shotgun.
You're going to get in line, right? Okay, good. Okay. And you're like, what do I have to do? Well, basically, you help out the junior warden with dinner and maybe set up, the jewels and some of the decorations in the lodge before the meetings. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Do I have a speaking part? That's the first question.
Yep.
No, you don't talk. Oh, perfect. Okay, good. Yeah. And by design. And as we talk about that system of progression, the idea is, as you laid out, you move up by watching the work done by the man in front of you.
Correct.
So you get there. Now, we'll talk about some of the pros and cons a little bit deeper, but one of the problems is that sometimes there's a break in the line where life happens. And I'm sure as a past master, you've experienced this.
With my own personal opinion, like I think in one of the episodes you said that I am the youngest past master with the longest trajectory to the east on the podcast, right? And it's because I've essentially served in every chair, right? And I've done chairs multiple times, but I also took life happened, right? I was deploying, and then I was also pursuing graduate degrees, right? So there were breaks in my Masonic career where I took a year off and then I took 2 years in a row. And then on top of that, I personally would turn down positions, right, if I knew that I couldn't dedicate 100%. Because I'm a big believer in that it's not about a title, right? It's about what can you provide for the lodge and what do you want to do for the brothers in the community, et cetera. So
I think that's what also makes you a rarity as a Freemason, because typically guys don't consider that. They're like, "Hey, can you do this job?" "Yeah, sure." And then they step into it and they do it, and they quarter cheek it. It would be a polite way of saying it.
Yeah.
They're not able to give it their all.
And I think part of it too is that everybody wants to be the master for the sole purpose of just becoming a past master, right? They want to wear the different apron. They want to have those privileges and be received in a lodge, called a worshipful brother, right? That leads to people maybe just going through it and not giving it 100, not saying giving it 100%, but just going through the motions, right? But not really trying to do anything unique or improve their lodge, because they're just, hey, we can open up a meeting. I can close the lodge. I can read minutes and I can go out. And at the end of a year, I get this fancy title. I get to wear a different apron. And then now I'm respected and looked upon as like if I'm some kind of expert, especially by the younger folks, right?
Yeah, and I think we shared a similar perspective when we first entered a lodge on our first visit. And it's like, okay, they're going to use different words or terms, but I get what this is. That guy sitting there that's got the top hat on and the big hammer in his hand, he's the president of this thing. Everybody's listening to what he's saying, and he's talking to this other guy here, and he sits across the room, so he must be the vice president. You know, the titles of the position that the officers hold, you don't really need to understand that to get the structure of it. The other thing that's significant is that they do sit in specific places in the lodge room, which is different. And if you come from an outside organization or volunteer group and you're like, hey, I've been the president of a board, or I've served as a trustee, or I've held some sort of chairmanship of a committee or something, I should be able to instantly be thrust into a leadership role in a lodge. That may not happen. There might be a line of guys going out the door and down the street that are there before you that are in line, so to speak.
And that's another thing, right, that's unique about Masonry. A lot of the times it's like you said, you're raised, and along with your Bible and maybe certificate, they're like, hey, congratulations, would you like to be a steward, right? Because that's normally the ones that they need, right? In some lodges, depending on how active you might go straight into a deacon, right? Chair. And then it goes by like seniority, almost like, well, and I think this is a flaw, right? Is that we look at, well, so and so came in first, so let me offer it to this person first. And that's where I guess I differ, in my opinion, is that I think that people should be appointed or elected based on those Masons' individual skill sets, right? So, for example, you could be a great orator, right, and do great memory work, right? But you may not necessarily have the managerial skills, right? Or the I dare say business acumen, right? Because running a lodge, there's business aspects of it, right? You might be the greatest, most charismatic speaker and great at memorizing, but you can't gather up the troops, right? Or motivate them to do something, or get them to see a vision, right?
Right.
So I think we'll get that once you get to like the wardens, specifically the senior warden and the worshipful master. For me, it shouldn't be just based on progression. I think brothers should be voting based on those individuals' qualities and merits, right? Because you have to have the memory work, and but can they run the lodge? Do they have a vision? Do they have the business acumen? Do they motivate the volunteer workforce, right? Because essentially it's a volunteer organization, right? Does he inspire them, right? To so that you get to do things, right? So I think there's more to being a master than just being able to pass the test and the examinations and congratulations because you've been awarded. And the problem is that I find that a lot of the times we just don't have that many choices to pick from.
So a term that I think every master or senior warden is used to hearing, and you even hear it in the junior warden's chair. So this would be the second vice president of the lodge as the junior warden is, have you put any thought into who's going to be your line? And this is the challenge because you worked your way up through a significant amount of chairs. There's a series to get there. Some of us jump. I came in as in New York. We actually have two more junior officer roles called the Masters of Ceremonies, which we even have less to say.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I came in as a junior steward, and then we had a year where our senior deacon had some personal challenges and difficulties that came up. He had to step out of line. We had about 6 months left in the Masonic year. They were looking for someone to fill that position. In New York State, that's not an elected chair, that's an appointed chair, which I'm sure is okay. Same for Maryland. So I said, hey, if no one's really willing to learn the work and do it, I'll step up and do it. And they're like, oh, great, okay. And I slid into the senior deacon's chair. I served there for 2 years, moved on to junior warden, and I think I've just been stuck in that chair for the last 6 years with all the lodges I've visited. But there are always those gaps that end up happening, and the master has to step back and kind of make decisions when you are able to appoint people. And it is, I would say, a privilege and an honor to serve for the master as an appointed officer.
Oh, 100%. And that's why I also don't like, so that's an example, I think, of my philosophy, right? It's like, it doesn't automatically have to be the next person in line. It's, hey, this person, one, is willing. Two, as a master, you would look and say, okay, he's capable. And I see that he has potential to be a warden, right? I see him as a leader of the lodge.
Mm.
Absolutely appoint him to the senior deacon, right? The counter argument, well, they didn't get to learn the junior deacon and blah blah blah, right? You still can do that. Right? And oh, by the way, you'll be in lodge, so you'll see it over and over,
Right.
right? You get elected, let's say, the junior warden, which is normally what happens, right? You get to the first wardenship. There's nothing in our constitution, for example, in Maryland, that precludes the brothers from voting that brother straight to the master's chair. Right? Because in Maryland, for example, you just have to have served as a warden.
Interesting. Okay.
And you have to have done your exemplification, right? So let's say that you were to join our lodge and you've already been a junior warden and you go out and you exemplify in the Maryland ritual, right? You've done all those other prerequisites. Just because you're not currently in the line doesn't mean that a brother can't nominate you and the brothers can't just directly vote you into the East, right? And that's why I think that a lot of people think, no, we have to vote the next person up. But what if that individual has proven that they are not leadership material, right? And it might not be because of their skill set. It might be that, they just got too many things that they're juggling. So why would you automatically vote that individual to the next chair? One, you're setting that individual up for failure, right? Because you're adding more onto their plate. Or quite frankly, that person's just going to be mediocre and not do the best because he's probably juggling way too many things or just doesn't have the capacity, right? Or those other soft skills, right? Whether it's communication skills or leadership management.
Right.
And it happens all the time. And you see it and you're like, it's okay. It's only for a year. Well, that could be the year that your lodge really goes down.
And I've seen that. I was telling you before we started recording the podcast episode, some examples of that is you have a lodge that has a master that has a very strong trestle board, that has a great connection with the lodge, with the community. Mm-hmm. Everything just seems to be going in such a positive direction. Brothers are coming. They're having a great time at meetings. The ones that you have raised or have initiated, they're engaged. Your next group of leaders are all set. They're all ready to go. And then, oh my gosh, it's the end of that master's term. He can only serve 1 year because we have this progressive line. And now it's the senior warden's turn for his year in the East, which I hate that expression more than anything. And that senior warden, as you're kind of describing, comes in and there's a lull. There can be a letdown, or what happened to me, which was a newly raised brother who had been there for the outgoing master's year, and it was just a strong year. He's like, what happened to the lodge? Like, why is everything so different? And I said, well, because we have a progressive line structure, and it's going to be based on sometimes the whole character, the culture of the lodge, the personality of it, the texture, everything can change we've talked about the progressive line. You just became, a new master mason. You were asked to be a junior steward. Yes, I've been wanting to do that so long. You're going to look at about, depending on your lodge, probably 5 to 7 years would be a good. Some guys, if it's less than 3, I feel for those brothers. I feel like they got pushed. There's other special circumstances, but you're going to look at about 4 or 5 years
Easy.
of going through the chairs before you can move up to the east. Now, I always thought that the progressive line was the only way, and that's what all lodges do. And probably 98.5, I don't know what the number is, do. But in other jurisdictions, you have to be proficient at certain points and in other things in Masonic ritual to be able to, or perform other Masonic tasks, so to speak, like obligating a brother in a degree, to be able to move to that. And it is not a progressive line. You can actually kind of camp out in a chair for a while, for lack of a better term, until you're able to show the proficiency to move to the east, which I thought that was an interesting way of tackling things as well.
I find that interesting, right? Like where it's not automatically progressive if another brother shows that they have the aptitude and they're able to perform those duties. And in theory, that is how I think all lodges work, because all the other positions are appointed, the wardens are elected. So, for example, I am never opposed to if a brother shows, let's say a brother always shows up at every event, works, has those qualities, and has happened to done all of the ritual and memory work, right? He just doesn't happen to be he doesn't happen to be a brother, right? But we know that he's there, right. He does his thing, and he knows the ritual. And then you have a warden that is still slacking, still hasn't learned, doesn't seem to be, I don't have a problem with voting that person into the wardenship, right? Because to me, it's about what's best for the lodge, not what's best for an individual. And by the nature of having an election, it automatically tells you that it's not guaranteed. You see what I mean? Because if it was a guarantee, if in other words, if becoming a junior warden guaranteed you being a senior warden and then guaranteed you being a master, then there wouldn't be an election every year. You would just, congratulations, you're now junior warden, and we already know that next year you'll be this, and the next following year you'll be that. And there would be no need for an election, right? So when something is a guarantee, then why are we electing? So I always tell people to look at it from those lenses. It's like, hey, nothing's guaranteed. You still got to earn. You still got to work. You got to show the brothers that you possess those qualities, right?
That's the other key thing I think to hit up, is that there is an election. So for brothers that get upset, we're like, I didn't have a choice. Well, you did. You could have not voted for this person. As Masons, we have to vote. You could vote for somebody else. But
I think it's important because you do learn, right? Like, I am glad that I went through all the chairs.
Right.
And I'm glad that I never rushed and was fortunate enough to just say, hey, look, I can't give 100%. I think it's not fair to the brothers, but it's also not fair for me, right? Like, if I don't think I'm ready or I could give it my best and I don't do it, and I'm happy that I went through all the lines, right? But I also came from when I first came in, right? Like, before I could join the line, I had to go to every practice for a year.
The leadership line should really be providing leadership learning or exposure to leadership to the brothers that are participating in it. And there are some lessons in leadership in Freemasonry, but you really got to comb through that ritual real deep to find it. It's not like a handbook that's given to you or anything. I'm sure both of us believe that being the most proficient in the ritual and the memorization, that doesn't necessarily make you a good leader, because what you find out when you get to the master's chair is that having a good command of those things is important, because there will be a whole swath of other things to distract you.
Oh yeah. That's, I think for me, ritual was like the least of my concerns, right? Because I was dealing with everything else, from running the lodge, scheduling events, working with brothers that are trying to join or visiting, demitting, financial, past masters that like to tell you their opinion and they call you in all hours of the night, right? Dealing with Grand Lodge issues, right? Ritual, I mean, that's the least of your worries, man. Like, if you're worried about ritual when then something went wrong in that process.
Right.
That's the least thing that you're doing. I mean, I was more concerned with, harmony and making sure that I was providing or trying to at least provide a good program for the lodge, right? Are we doing enough charity events? What do the brothers want? Do they want more family events? Do they want more learning? Do they want more of this? A little bit of everything, right? Trying to be at every single event and supporting every brother in their personal life. And that was me, right? Ritual was the last thing on my mind.
Right.
Like I said, man, I spent 2 of my anniversaries in Main Lodge.
Having an understanding wife, that's another prerequisite. And I just want to go on record by saying I am not the biggest fan of a progressive line, but I understand why it exists in Freemasonry. I understand what the idea of it is behind the lodge leadership structure. And the best thing you can do is, if you want to change something, you got to jump in, you got to be a part of it. And that means you got to exert yourself, and you can influence others so that they can step up, so that you don't have bad people in big roles.
Oh, 100%. Here's something that I know is going to be super controversial, but I know of really good leaders, like really good leaders, right? That manage large organizations, that I've served under and everything. They just can't memorize, right? But they would be excellent worshipful masters, excellent, right? And I think that if we want for masonry to continue, right, and to avoid, staleness and stagnation and repeating, we have to start looking at other options, right? Like, so for example, okay, a master should open and close his lodge, right? That's basics, right? But man, this individual not only can do that, but he possesses all these other great leadership traits and management traits as well, because there's a difference between being a good manager and a good leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people, they think that it's the same thing. They're not equivalent, right? You could be a great manager and suck as a leader, right? You could be a great leader and suck as a manager, right? And you're like, man, this guy would make a great worshipful master. He'd do all these great things, can't memorize, right? Can't do the lecture. Okay, well, maybe there should be a way that you can prove to the master and say, listen, this guy has all the leadership traits. He just can't do this. He would make and show his bona fides, right, as to why we think that this individual should be a good master. And when it comes down to lecture, hey, here's a past master that can do it.
Yeah.
Or here's your education officer, if your lodge happens to have that, and he can do it, right? So that also allows for these other brothers that maybe are not strong in the ritual aspect from a memory perspective, right, but would make excellent leaders and can take the lodge to another level, have that opportunity to sit in these, because I'd rather have that than an individual that can, memorize every word, period, comma, but can't lead himself out of a paper bag.
And it's also not really a good experience for the brother. I know we tend to think about all of that, but he's not really. I understand thanks to our podcast that we had about why be a master, and just talking with other masters, and having been in a lodge for 8 years now, and seeing the significance of that chair and the responsibility and the privilege of getting to be the master of a lodge. And you want the guy to have the best experience during his time in the East. Yeah.
I look at my job as a past master as, like you said, as try to be a mentor and help the younger brother, but I'm the master's biggest cheerleader, right? Like, once a master commits to an idea, right? Okay, let's go. And then how can I get it to be a successful idea, right? Whether it's an event or some kind of initiative, my job is to see how that master's initiative or event or whatever he has will be successful, right? And then behind closed doors, right, whisper good counsel in an ear. Sometimes that good counsel comes with a very passionate Latino behind it.
I thought you would change. This past master kind of softened you up a little bit, got a little, and there comes the energy. I love this guy. Well, this has been our Craftsman Online podcast. I want to thank our guest this week, Worshipful Brother Luis Gonzalez. Thank you again for coming back on.
Brother RC, thank you for inviting me again. I'm glad that you're not sick and tired of me. No. I love this podcast. I love honestly, I do, and I recommend it to everybody. As a matter of fact, just a little plug here, I belong to a Tuesday, I guess you could, Masonic topic group, right? And all the brothers now listen to this podcast.
They're the ones. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, seriously, it's I love it. So thank you for inviting me back again on your platform. It's an honor, honestly. It's a privilege.
We appreciate it. And if you've enjoyed this episode, you want to hear more, you can tell Siri or Alexa to play the Craftsman Online podcast. We're available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.